Next up, we have Rasheed Walker, the offensive tackle out of Penn State, who, and I'm going to try and keep this shorter for because I have a feeling I am disappointing a fan base with this video in terms of my observations and thoughts on Rasheed. It feels like, from what I've read, the national media seems to be a lot higher on Walker than I am, which is why, it's Friday morning and I'm filming this video despite the fact that personally I wouldn't take him until Saturday. I just wouldn't feel confident enough in what he brings to the table. But if somebody does in fact take him tonight, day 2, I suppose I get it based on the physical tools, and we'll talk about that as we get going. But he has some upside to him. I just think that if you're taking someone in the first 90 picks, they have to be an impact player that can contribute right away. And with that, I don't necessarily know if Rasheed is there. In fact, I would say Rasheed is not there, which is why I have that 5th round grade on him. However, how did I get there? First and foremost, the pass blocking. This is going to be the biggest negative with Rasheed's grade. His feet and his base, everything was just all messed up at times, right? Particularly, I would say, against speed rushers. It felt like he was just in over his head at times in terms of the quickness game, right? In terms of having the athleticism to go meet these guys out on an island. So instead, what he would do is fly outside, right? Open up his hips. Instead of staying square to the line of scrimmage, have his hips opened up facing the sideline. His weight was all off balance. His feet would be narrow. He'd be clicking his heel together, compromising his base. Hips are open. I just wrote toast next to that in my notes, right? Because that's what happened very often. He would either be toast, get toasted, absolutely burnt off the edge. And in that regard, I'm just not convinced that he is a future left tackle in the NFL. At least long term, in terms of at a high level. He could definitely play it. And that's what I think he's trying to do. That's something I'll note. He was listed on the Penn State website as being 6'6", 325. Came at the combine at 313. So I think he recognizes actually some of the issues that I'm speaking to in terms of the foot quickness. Because I just didn't see it, and I thought that was compromising a lot of his technique in other areas. And I think that's why he's trying to lose weight and shed pounds, is to become quicker and be more able to handle those guys coming off the edge. So maybe that's a testament to the work ethic and the motor and all that stuff. And he's going to need that as we keep going through some of these negatives. I thought that his hands, he's got good length and he's got good power on his punches. Those are two positive things. He has 33 and 5/8 inch arms. And when he gets a clean punch on these DNs and outside linebackers, you can see visibly in their body the impact that he has on them. I gave him an 8 out of 10 in terms of power and strength. However, on the flip side, I gave him a 5 out of 10 on hands for the simple fact that both his timing and placement I thought needed to be refined. And to me, again, maybe a lot of that comes down to the fact that he was just so stressed. It looked like you could see the panic in his footwork at times, in his just mannerisms, in terms of how he was going to overcome the guy across from him. And as a result, I think at times the hand placement could slip, the punch timing could slip. And what do I mean by that? Everybody loves length. They love length as a number. The longer arms, the better. Well, that's true as long as that player has an understanding and is able to use length accordingly, right? If you don't understand how to use your 33 and 5/8 inch arms, then they're not particularly useful for you, right? You could have 100 inch arms, but if you throw that punch and wait to throw that punch until the defender is 5 inches away, you're not using length. You might as well have 5-inch arms, right? And in that regard, it felt like Rasheed just needed to get an earlier sense of when to throw his punches to try and keep those guys at bay more often, because there were a lot of reps where he was letting guys in his chest and they would control the rep from that point. And oftentimes, like I said, in terms of the getting burnt, a lot of times when he would let them control the rep, they would in fact control the rep, and it didn't end positively for either Rasheed or the quarterback of the Nittany Lions. That being said, that's something that's teachable, right? A lot of these things that I'm talking about with Rasheed are teachable. His frame, however, 6'6", 313, like I say, he's shedding weight. The power and the strength, I see the raw tools. No question. I just need to see more of them being put together in concert with good technique, and that's not where he was at, in my opinion. I thought some other grades that I was a little bit lower on. Balance. I thought part of the struggles here were because he was flying outside again to get those speed rushers, but it was also just because of the way he's set. He's more of a waist bender than a knee bender, I would argue, relative to many of his peers, and that's a term you'll see thrown around, because if you're a waist bender and you're leaning forward, guys can easily just use that against you and dump you on your face, essentially, right? Because that's where your body is kind of naturally going. And in that regard, he needed to get his shoulders out of his reps a little bit more. Shoulders back, chest up, and strike with your hands rather than sort of lunging and trying to attack like downwards. And that was another note I had about the placement of his punches. He was coming like over the top and down, which made it just so easy for guys to get up and under him, because again, he didn't always have the best leverage, and he wasn't always throwing them quick enough. So guys, it just felt like we're getting free shots on his chest, and generally the person who controls their opponent's chest controls the rep, and it just felt like that's where he was at. Otherwise, I gave him a 6.5 on physicality and finishing. I thought he was decent as a run blocker. I thought he was decent, and I see it a little bit with Rasheed. Right? I gave him an 11.75 out of 15 on run blocking, which isn't necessarily a bad grade by any means. I thought he did a generally good job leveraging his inside hand to get guys away from the ball. So, if the play is going in B gap, even though Rasheed's not necessarily blowing guys off the line of scrimmage, it felt like he was able to do enough to torque the guy out of that gap and wedge himself between ultimately where the ball is going and where the defender is. So in that regard, I thought he was solid, but again, what you're really looking for is generating movement, and there wasn't necessarily a ton of that. So while it was positive and while the physicality was fine, I think we need a little bit more of it, right? Show off that power and strength that I gave him an 8 on. Show that off a little bit more, and maybe that again comes down to the leverage. It comes down to engaging his hips, a bunch of stuff like that I just didn't necessarily think he did well. But again, generally teachable. The last grade and the lowest grade that I'll do a little bit of a dive into here today is the IQ and awareness, and this one was tough to me because man, it just felt like Rasheed was not very in tune with the defensive cues in terms of what they were trying to do pre-snap as well as post-snap, reading and reacting to them accordingly. So what do I mean? I mean that, say he's had a defensive end that's been just speed rushing him all game, snap after snap after snap. Now all of a sudden that 5 technique starts to tighten his he starts to tighten up on Rasheed. So instead of being more of maybe a 7 technique, now he's like a tight 5 technique, right? Just off of Rasheed's left shoulder. Well, what that means generally, and this is what my coach, my college offensive line coach, always used to call, you have to have your spidey sense of tingling. You have to realize, like, based on where that guy is aligned play to play, if he's tighter, he's probably slanting inside to B gap, right? And then somebody else is probably coming around for C gap. And for example, with Braxton Jones, the guy from Southern Utah, you saw that on display quite often, that ability to recognize that pre-snap and adjust accordingly. With Rasheed, it felt like we were pulling teeth. It felt like he was oftentimes lucky to, recognize those sort of cues pre-snap, and then post-snap, it felt like he was just surprised. That would be the description I would use for Rasheed. It felt like he was surprised. It felt like I don't want to say deer in the headlights, but it just felt like he didn't expect what he got oftentimes, and he wasn't able to react quick enough to make a dent in it. And as a result, a lot of guys with inside moves, and when he was flying out for those speed rushers, counters back inside. That was really where guys got him the most. It's when all his weight is flooded in one direction as he's trying to round the hoop, and somebody just puts a foot in the ground, upon contact, and counters back to the inside, which is right where the quarterback is, and it just wasn't always the prettiest. But with that being said, like I said, the physical tools are there. I'm going to keep reiterating that. I think Rasheed is a guy that, this is the scenario I would lay out. If you have a veteran tackle, and not necessarily a need for tackle right away, but you have a veteran tackle, someone who's experienced, someone who knows the game, has good technique, maybe Rasheed's the type of guy that you could put in there, in that room with that guy as more of a backup initially, and then you hope that he goes on to ultimately, elevate his play to be at that level eventually down the line. For me, if I had to give my estimate, I would say year 1, with Rasheed Walker needs to be spent tearing down the bad habits, tearing down the opening of his hips, tearing down the clicking of his heels, the narrowing of his base, tearing down the bad hand placement, all those things. Tear it down to the ground. Then the next year would be spent building it back up with good traits. And that's not an easy thing to have happen. For you to be taken in the NFL draft at all and then be told by an offensive line coach that, yeah, everything you've done to get to this point, we don't really think that it's useful and what you should be doing. That's tough criticism to hear, and that's something that's going to take a lot of time and effort for Rasheed if that happens. And in that regard, I'm not saying that he can't be a good player and a good starter down the line, but I think it's going to come down to his work ethic, and is he willing to put in the time in the film room, on the practice field. Like I said, I don't know how many game reps he should see year one or even year two necessarily. I think once you get into year two, you could argue that you're teaching him the good stuff, the good technique. Let him go use it, and depending on your situation with the rest of your offensive line, maybe that's a fine time to put him out there. But until he's a solid starter, I think 2 years personally. That's just my estimate as somebody who has played various positions across the O-line for 17 years of my life and is looking to make this a career afterwards. But with that being said, that's really all I have on Rasheed. I think he's an interesting prospect, and if he gets put in a good situation and is willing to work, which maybe that's what the losing weight is indicative of, and in that case, maybe this is a little bit too low of a grade on Rasheed. If he's already lost 12 pounds since the season, since last season started at least, maybe he realizes that he has to change his body composition. He's been putting in the time, the hours in the weight room, on the cardio machines, on the practice field, and if you just keep doing that, then yeah, Rasheed very well might work out well. For me, just in terms of if I'm making the pick, the confidence level I have in his ability to do that, I'm putting it in the 5th round with a 64, 0.68. So with that being said, that's all I have for you guys in this one. I'd say if you enjoyed, leave a thumbs up. But I have a feeling this is going to be the source of a lot of thumbs down. So I apologize if I made you guys feel down on your pick. I just think he's more of a developmental project than anything else. Not that project can't come out good down the line, but as of right now, I don't necessarily know how NFL ready he is. And with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. I'm mic'd up now. I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. See you next time.